of Matthew verse by verse since the fall of this past year, and man, there's so much rich truths that are found in the scriptures. We know that, and then Matthew, one of Jesus's followers, as a tax collector. Remember, the story of Matthew was that he was a tax collector right around tax season right now, right? Everybody loves taxes. Nobody loves taxes. Nobody loved Matthew, who was a tax collector. He was an employee of the Roman government, and yet he had an encounter with Jesus that dramatically changed Matthew's life. And Matthew decides, and probably with some help, decides to put Jesus' life down on paper for us to be able to be reading about this a couple thousand years later. And I'm just grateful for that, because there's so much beauty that is shown here throughout the Gospel of Matthew, the patterns that Matthew, of course, as a Jew, he pulls from the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, bringing forth the truths of who Jesus is and how Jesus is fulfilling the prophecies of the Old Testament, from Isaiah, from Micah, from Jeremiah, all of these scriptures that point to this Messiah, this Rabbi Jesus that comes on the scene. And so to catch us up a little bit, we've been walking through the Sermon on the Mount specifically. We just finished up just before Easter, specifically the Beatitudes, which were these declarations of blessedness that Jesus makes over a ragtag group of people that are sitting on this hillside. From the area of Galilee, they were the outcasts. They were those who were unseen by most of society. And Jesus calls these individuals to himself. He says to follow me. And then, of course, he has that inner circle of his followers, of his disciples that would later be collected. But at this point in time, in Matthew chapter 5, there isn't this full collection of that 12. Instead, there's on this hillside those from Decapolis, like the outsiders of the Jewish nation, those from Syria, and those from the entire areas of Galilee. That we find that at the end of chapter number 4. And then jumping into chapter number 5, we begin to see the characteristics of those that the kingdom has come for. Those that Jesus has come to present himself to. Jesus would come on the scene declaring the gospel, or the good news. The Greek word is evangelion, of the kingdom that is arriving here on this earth in the person of King Jesus himself. And we learned about the individuals that Jesus has come for. We learned about the poor in spirit, those who are weak of breath. We just sang about that this morning. Lift up your eyes, those who are weak of breath. We talked about those who are mourning, those who are weeping, those who are suppressed under the oppression of the Roman tyranny and the religiosity of the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees of the day. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Remember, they were in a land that was occupied, and Jesus is saying, you are going to inherit the land, the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus indicates, look, if you become a peacemaker, that means you will step into chaos, you will step into conflict, and as a result, you will be persecuted, just like Jesus himself. The ultimate peacemaker would step into our chaos, we learned last week, as he stepped onto this earth and experienced immense suffering on our behalf. And then Jesus begins to describe the kingdom people. Jesus steps forward in talking about the kingdom has come for these types of individuals. And then these kingdom people will have some characteristics. Jesus beautifully uses a couple illustrations here to describe the people of the kingdom. And he'll continue on as we'll dive deeper into this passage that he begins to describe the heart posture of those kingdom people. I think we have to think about, when it comes to salt and light, as we'll step into it in just a second, we always have to step back in our minds to God's original intention for humanity. For us that are sitting here today, for the audience that Jesus was teaching on that hillside in Galilee, that God created humanity for two inseparable relationships. The first being a right relationship with God. And the second being right relationship with one another. That's literally what life makes up. That's what makes up our lives, is our relationship with God and our relationship with one another. And the word righteousness, which we've talked about a few times before now, has to do with right relationship with God and with each other. This is seen in creation in Genesis 1 and 2, where humanity lives in harmony with God and with others and with creation itself. But what happened? Going back in the storyline, what happened to this beautiful storyline of God and his creation, God and humanity? Well, sin comes in, and it fractures both our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. There was separation from God, and there was now brokenness in human relationships. You know, in Adam and Eve's story, Adam quickly begins to point the blame at Eve, his wife, and they at that point were joined as one flesh in matrimony, and yet sin came and severed that relationship. And from that point forward, literally their children would end up, Cain would end up killing his brother Abel. Like on the first pages of history, we have murder taking place. There's brokenness in human relationships. There is corruption that now enters creation. And then the story of redemption is therefore not only about personal salvation, and the word salvation has to do with healing and restoring. It is God who is restoring his creation through restored people. In our passage this morning, Jesus used two definitive word pictures or illustrations to depict the kind of people that Jesus is calling and forming. And he uses these two illustrations of salt and light. Let's look at the first of these two word pictures, salt. For much of human history, salt was not a cheap pantry item that we now keep in our pantry, or that we have in the little shakers downstairs, around our tables. For most of history, salt was actually one of the most valuable commodities in the world. In fact, in the Roman Empire, salt was so important that soldiers were sometimes paid with it. In fact, the word salary that we still use to this day actually comes from the Latin word salarium, which refers to money that was given to Roman soldiers specifically for purchasing salt or as a part of their ration. Salt wasn't just a seasoning that we now throw on top of our food, and I do too much of, right? But it was actually a source of survival. Salt was very much a source of survival for the early culture at this time. So if a family had no refrigeration, which they didn't, and if they had no preservatives, no modern storage, salt meant the difference between having food and losing it. Meat and fish would spoil quickly in the heat of the Mediterranean world. And when salt was rubbed into it, the decay was slowed down and the life of that meat was extended. Because of this, salt was very much treasured. It was carried on long journeys, it was traded carefully, and it was guarded as something that was essential. But not all salt was pure. in regions near the Dead Sea, which is one of the most famous regions in the world, honestly, that holds this high amount of salt in one location. The other location would be, what was it? Anybody from the Utah area? Salt Lake? There we go. So we have the Dead Sea with a high percentage of salt in the water. And then, of course, Salt Lake City in our area, which has this high percentage of salt. And it's this combination of sodium and chloride for you nerds out there. So salt was a source of survival. And it was a way to preserve meat. It was a way to preserve food. But not all salt was pure. And some of the salt deposits there along the Dead Sea would often get mixed with different minerals and impurities, and over time the outer layer could lose its effectiveness. It still looked like salt, but no longer functioned like salt. When that happened, it was then thrown out, because it was no longer useful. So here in Matthew 5 and verse number 13, so when Jesus said, "Ye are the salt of the earth," his listeners heard the metaphor and they begin to put connections in their mind to what salt does and what salt is in a very practical way. And this was something that they understood very readily, which in our modern culture, we just don't understand the value of what salt was at that time now. And so I'm just trying to get us in the idea that salt was something that was extremely valuable to the culture at the time. And so he says, you are meant to be what preserves life in a world that is decaying. You are the salt of the earth. We know that Jesus is the King. And he's declaring the gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom. And he's forming a people that are desiring to follow this king. And as followers of the kingdom, as followers of this Jesus, we are then given this partnership with God to become covenant people that are partnering with God in the restoration of our broken world. And again, I think Brian just prayed through it, and I got a little emotional this morning just thinking about the brokenness of our world. Thinking about the children that are experiencing the tragedies around our world, not only that are on the news, but that aren't on the news. The brokenness of our world, the brokenness of our nation, the brokenness of the people, of this earth that God himself spoke into existence. I imagine that it grieves the heart of God, the Creator, as he looks and observes as his creation is destroying itself and it is in the process of decaying. And so God is calling us, is calling that group of people that was sitting on that hillside. Jesus is calling them to become people that are part of the process of bringing a preservation, purity, and peace through right relationship with God and right relationship with others. Back to Genesis. Right relationship with God and right relationship with others. Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. So let's think briefly about what a couple things that salt represents in Scripture. First of all, salt represented preservation. I think we kind of touched on this already. Salt represented a preservation from decay. It was the way that food was stored and it was preserved from going bad and rotten. We have refrigeration now. We know we have refrigerators that take care of that for us now. But in the culture at that time, salt was so valuable to bring preservation. Salt restrains corruption and preserves what is valuable. That's what salt does. Salt is also involved in purity. In fact, in in Leviticus chapter 2, in the process of God setting up the sacrifices of Israel, they actually use salt as a part of their sacrifices. In Leviticus chapter 2 and verse number 13, the scriptures say, "And every oblation of thy meat offering," do I have that verse up there? There we go. "And every oblation of thy meat offering shalt thou season with salt." Interesting, right? It's like, what? We're performing the sacrifice before God, but then as a part of the sacrifice is this salt that is to be seasoned over the meat offering. "Neither shalt thou suffer or let the salt of the covenant of thy God be lacking from thy meat offering. With all thine offerings thou shalt offer salt." And so salt had this connection of purity before God, of worship before God. It had this connection of preservation, but also this seasoning over the offering that was being offered to God. And in worship, it was to be seasoned with salt. So salt also is connected to promise. Salt is connected to promise. In fact, in 2 Chronicles chapter 13, or Numbers chapter 18 first, Numbers chapter 18 verse 19, it says, "It is a covenant of salt." In fact, this language was just used in Leviticus as well. This covenant of salt. And the word covenant just means promise. And promises in this culture, and covenants in this culture was very much more binding than when you and I use the word, "I promise. I'll promise I'll be there on time." Yeah, right. "I'll promise I won't do that again." It doesn't hold the weight that covenants and promises held at this time. And so God, as he's talking to the children of Israel and leading them into a relationship back with him, remember that the relationship was separated in the garden. And as God desires to dwell with his people once again, he says, look, you're going to use salt as this imagery of preservation, of purity, but also of promise, of covenant between you and I. This relationship between you and I that is binding, that is something that is close, that doesn't want to be broken. When we take our marriage vows or covenants or promise to each other, that is something that we go in with the intention of not wanting that to break apart. And yet we know that happens in our relationships here on this earth. And it happened with the relationship with God, who is perfect, with humans who are imperfect. We would break the promises. We would break the covenant over and over again. So Numbers 18 says, "It is the covenant of salt forever before the Lord unto thee and to thy seed with thee." And then in 2 Chronicles 13, this is a promise that was given to David specifically. "Ought ye not to know that the Lord God of Israel gave the kingdom over Israel to David forever?" Well, what is the kingdom of David that lasts forever? Well, we have to connect that from Matthew chapter 1, that it comes through the lineage of David and comes to Jesus as the fulfillment of this kingdom that would last forever. And you know what was given as a sign of covenant, of promise? Salt. It says, "Ought ye not to know that the Lord God of Israel gave the kingdom over Israel to David forever, even to him and to his sons by a covenant of salt." So salt represents permanence. So the preserving nature of salt represented God trying to communicate, hey, this is something that I want to last for a long time, to last forever, in fact. That I want my promises to you and your covenant with me, this relationship between the Creator and the created beings, us as humanity, is this relationship he doesn't ever want broken. And he visualizes that with salt. Salt is also connected to peacemaking. We learned about blessed are the peacemakers just a few weeks ago. But it's also connected to salt. Mark chapter 9 and verse number 50 says, "Salt is good. But if the salt have lost his saltiness, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace one with another. So do you see how the salt has this connection to peace one with another, relationship one with another, relationship with God? Salt produces peace and relational wholeness. What Jesus means here is that Jesus is declaring that his followers are a preserving presence in a decaying world. That a holy people are reflecting God's purity. That a covenant community is marked by faithfulness. That a peacemaking people are in the midst of the divided spaces. We talked about this a few weeks ago. That we as the salt doesn't mean that we hide from conflict. But instead we become the hands and feet of Jesus, of love and grace. What was it later on in the New Testament? Talk about let your speech be always seasoned with salt. That our purpose in existence as followers of Jesus is to preserve, is to peacemake, is that even a word? Is to bring peace between relationships on this earth and relationship with God. You are the salt of the earth. Salt is not valuable if it lives in isolation. How many of us love to live in isolation? Okay? But salt is not valuable if it's stuck at the back of your cupboard doing absolutely nothing. Salt is meant to be in the world and in contact with the world so that it may have an impact and an influence on the world. We are not of this world, but we are definitely in this world. So Matthew 5:13 here teaches us that salt can lose its effectiveness. It's not a loss of identity. It's not that you no longer become our salt, but that you lose your impact, you lose your influence. This happens when compromise replaces holiness. And I think I get a little triggered by the word compromise, so that just bear with me. But the truth is, when salt has been compromised, when it no longer is salty, that salt is compromised, right? If I use the salt on my food and I continue to dump salt on top of it and it no longer has any saltiness to it, the value of that salt is useless. And so the truth is when you and I compromise, and what I mean by compromise is not what rushes into our mind often if you have a church background of any kind. No, but instead our relationships are compromised. Our relationship with God, when there are things that are coming in between my relationship with God, when we sang earlier that we don't want to live in a world where we're pursuing distractions. When there are distractions that come in the way of my relationship with God, when there are distractions that come in the way of my relationship with each other, when we let devices, when we let other things that draw our attention away have more of our attention than our attention to each other and our attention to God. I heard the phrase a little while back, and it has stuck with me, that worship begins with attention. Worship begins with attention. I cannot even begin to worship until my attention is placed on to God Himself. Salt, when it's lost its saltiness, loses its effectiveness. Compromise that replaces holiness. When isolation replaces engagement, when disobedience replaces covenant faithfulness. So as salt, followers of Jesus partner with God to preserve His creation by living as a faithful, holy, and peacemaking covenant people in the world. That's our takeaway for you and I this morning when it comes to the essence of what it means to be salt. We are followers of Jesus who are partnering with God to preserve His creation by living as a faithful and holy and peacemaking covenant people in the world. And I just have to tell you this, the world is starving for salty people. The world is hungering for some salt. What's the word I'm looking for? Who are just seasoned with people who are just seasoned with the saltiness of who God is. Flavor, there we go. They're looking for some people who when they run across you, they go, man, that something. That was really, you've done that. You've been at a restaurant and you've like taken a bite of something, you've gone, oh man, that was really, really good. Last night we were at Val's, and Val's had like this, I don't know, he had chicken wings and he put them in some kind of sauce, and like the bowl was set like right here next to me, and I just kept grabbing more and more and more. I was like, man, this is so good. Val, what'd you put on this? This is so good. It had like sriracha sauce and all kinds of other seasonings. It was delicious. When you and I become the salt of the earth, when others come in contact with us, they can't get enough of what we have to offer them. And I don't say that in a salesy way, okay? Do you make that sense? Does that make sense? I want us to become true followers of Jesus, those of us who are desiring relationship with God, and in so doing, we become covenant people or the peacemakers between God and other humans, pointing them to this loving Creator. Salt. But then Jesus uses another illustration. He uses another word picture. He uses salt and light. Verse number 14 says, "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid." So just pause there for a second. We have light of the world, and also it seems like a city is connected to this. Light, city, connected to each other, that's set on top of a hill. And it cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick. And it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So light in Scripture represents the truth that is revealed, a life that is guided, God's presence made visible. Jesus' use of the language, a city on a hill, obviously has to be connected to the city of Jerusalem itself. You know what the name Jerusalem means? City of peace. You know what Jerusalem was to be the central point of? A peacemaking hub for the entire world. That's what Jerusalem, the city of peace, was supposed to be. It was to be the city that was set on a hill. So when Jesus uses this language of a city on a hill, he's referring to Jerusalem, the city of peace, being that representation of God's desire to be with His people. But we know that in many ways, Israel would fail at this. Right? God called Abraham from amongst the world, and He says, look, in you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. I'm calling you not to just isolate, but instead to be the light to the entire world in and through you, Abraham, and your seed. You are to be this light to the world, this connection, this junction, this intersection between heaven and earth. This is what this city was to represent. Israel would fail in this. Isaiah's vision of God's people was to be like this, and many shall go and say, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and He will teach us of His ways, and we will walk in His paths. The theme of light is all throughout the book of Isaiah. We covered some of this during our Advent and Christmas gatherings, where we talked about light that shows up over and over again throughout the book of Isaiah. Later on in Isaiah chapter 60, arise, shine, for thy light is come, And the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And he's talking about the nation of Israel. He's talking about the city of Jerusalem would be this city on a hill, this light that was to shine for all nations. Look at the end of the verse. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Those who were non-Jews. We talked about the wise men that would come from afar, non-Jews, to see the light that had arrived. The city language reappears in the book of Revelation. Revelation 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea, no more chaos. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, the new city of peace, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. We recognize that language, tabernacle, the dwelling place of God, and his desire to dwell with his creation. The tabernacle with man. And he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all their tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, write, for these words are true and faithful. And we know that there is a day coming when our King of heaven will make all things new, where there will be no more sorrow, there will be no more tears, there will be no more crying. But until then, we know that there is this seedling of a kingdom that is arising. It was arising in Jesus' day as he stepped onto the earth and said, I'm here as the king, coming and arriving to bring the good news that I'm here to restore. I am here to heal. I am here to recreate. You know, that's what Jesus would go about doing, is healing the nations. And what he was doing when he would touch someone and heal them of their sickness and their pain is he was realigning them with original creation. Isn't that interesting to just think about? When Jesus stepped on this earth, it wasn't necessarily a miracle. We call it a miracle. It was out of the ordinary, right? But in Jesus' mind, no, this is actually realigning back to what I intended, which was there was to be no more pain, no more sorrow. And yet we sit here this morning, no, that our lives are full of pain. Our lives are full of sorrow. And yet the King is on the move, we sang about last week. He is on the move to bring restoration to his creation. Light is hidden. It is not hidden. It is visible. It is public. It leads the way, points the way. A lighthouse, when it sits on the shores over here in Oregon or Washington, it guides. Jesus is saying that your life reveals God's character. That your actions point people to the Father. That our community is meant to be seen, not to be concealed. We're not trying to create a little cult out here, okay? Even though we do have some woods here and we're all huddled in here. No, our desire is for us to be in the world. To come away, yes. To set ourselves apart, yes, and to be restored through the scriptures and through time with each other, but then to go back into the world, to become people of the kingdom. John 8, Jesus would say, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. In the very next chapter, Jesus would say, as long as I am in the world, that's an interesting phrase for Jesus to use. I am the light of the world. So that makes me scratch my head and say, what happens when Jesus left the world? Because he said, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So what happens when Jesus leaves the world? That's where Matthew 5 comes in. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. When it comes to light, as light, followers of Jesus reflect God's truth to the world by living visibly as restored people whose lives point others to the Father. And when we think about salt and we think about life or light, salt is our influence through preserving, through presence. It preserves what is near. And light is the influence through visibility, revealing what is true. Together, salt and light, they describe a people who are living faithfully, not only in private. That's the essence of what salt is. This preserving nature that is behind the scenes, yet is at work. You know, salt, you don't necessarily see salt unless you have like those huge coarse grains of salt, but you don't necessarily see salt. It dissolves, right? It dissolves into your food. It dissolves into water. It's not clearly seen, yet it is present and it is having an effect. And that's what yours and my relationship with God is. Something that is hidden and not seen on the day-to-day, moment-to-moment. Yours and my relationship with God is not clearly seen, but it's present and there if we're cultivating that relationship. And then light is what others do see. Matthew 5:16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. Here's what happens as followers of Jesus, as Christians. We often pick one extreme or the other. Right? We say, I'm going to cultivate my relationship with God and make this incredible, deep, like monastic type relationship with God. And we say, oh man, I had this beautiful time sitting in the presence of God. And man, I say, keep doing that. Keep spending that time with God. Keep abiding with Jesus. Absolutely soaking in your time with God and your relationship with God. Or others of us say, you know what, I want to make sure that everybody sees my good works and everybody says, oh wow, that's such a good person. He calls himself a Christian and he follows God, and yet we're lacking when it comes to the private relationship with God. Or if we have this deep relationship with God, we're lacking when it comes to our visibility to those who are around us. And yet Jesus calls us to be both salt and light. He calls us not only to relationship that is hidden, but also a light that is clearly seen. God is restoring His creation through a restored people. As salt, we preserve what is good. We bring peace into broken relationships. We live as covenant people with God and others. And as light, we reveal God's truth. We reflect His glory. We point others to the Father. Followers of Jesus are salt in a decaying world, light in a dark world. And through our lives, God is restoring His creation, bringing humanity back into right relationship with Himself and with one another, all the way back to the garden. And so the invitation is to you this morning. In fact, the identity has already been given according to Jesus. You are the salt. You are the light. I think it's time for us to begin living into that identity, living into that relationship with God and relationship with others. You know, our hearts should break for our broken world. When I turn on the news, it should stir something inside of me. There should be compassion there. Let's take that a step further. What is your circle of influence? I really can't impact in a practical way something that's happening on the other side of our world. But you know where I can have an impact and influence is right in my own personal circle of influence. What if my family needs the salt and the light of Jesus first? What if they need to see that you as a follower of Jesus are somebody that is completely different than what the world is offering. Let's stand together this morning and just take a few moments in prayer as we contemplate what it means to be salt and light. How about this? What if in your mind, you're saying in your mind, Lord, I want you to give me just a first step. What is the first step in my relationship with you, God, this week? What is a first step towards you? God says, if you draw nigh to me, I will draw nigh to you. What is that first step for you? What about a relationship with someone else? We haven't even gotten to love your enemies. That's right here in this passage. We're not even touching that yet. How about the people in your life that you think, man, I need God's help to kind of step in a little more for even the people that I genuinely care about. So let's do that this morning. Let's take some moments this morning to contemplate salt and light, what it means for God to restore his creation through you and I this morning.